Alright, so this is going to be a video talking about making the Skull-Vader helmet for Nico. Now I had one image to work off of for this, and it was like a t-shirt graphic, very, very sort of stylized. So I kind of looked up a few other images on the internet to like see what the overall face shape would be and like the kind of idea of the mask. But basically to start with this, I actually just grabbed that weird mask of myself that I made from like 2 years ago for Halloween, and I just sort of cut that apart very aggressively and converted it into a new sort of weird skull shape for this helmet. And I did that in Maya. Normally for organic stuff I would use Moto, but I was just like, I have it and I'm lazy and I don't feel like opening a new program. So you can see I'm just sort of going through and blocking in like major details, pretty much like I do in most other programs. Basically prepping the thing for ZBrush and sculpting. And this time, if you watched the video I did on Chamberlain, I talked a little bit about how I kind of wasted a bunch of time worrying about topology only to destroy a lot of that in ZBrush. This is a complete waste of time. So this one, I sort of did the opposite. And I was like, what if I just make this really, really loose and then I'll go in and like sculpt it in ZBrush. It's just easier for me personally to get the basic shape in Maya. And I also tried something a little bit different with this particular helmet where I actually went through and I'll get to it in a little bit, but I actually thickened it before I sculpted it. Because there's a brush in ZBrush, if you go into like the brush tab, auto masking, and then like back face masking, and you have to do this for each brush, which drives me nuts. But it'll basically allow you to draw, like if you have something thin, like a helmet that's only a few millimeters thick, this one I think is like 5.4 millimeters thick all the way around, it'll let you sculpt on the front, but like not screw up the back. And if you've ever sculpted in like most sculpting programs, you'll notice like with really thin walls and stuff like that, it gets a little bit funky a lot of times. If you draw on the front, it'll draw on the back, and then it'll like crush your mesh, and it's awful. But it actually worked out really nice, and it saved me a lot of trouble later because I was able to sort of mess around with the thickening of the mesh and like work with less sort of topology in the way I'm thickening it right now and just sort of cleaning it up. It's a lot easier to work with like a low density mesh than like a 200,000 poly sculpt that's all tries. Tries make working with things really annoying. But yeah, so you can see pretty much just chucked the little thing into ZBrush, and then just started sculpting. So I did a little bit of thickening around the bones, just to make them a little bit less sort of rigid feeling, blocking in a lot of detail. And this is like something where previously I might have done this in, Moto, or like done it in the initial stages in Maya, like adding a lot of this detail, and I'm like, ZBrush is so much faster, and I don't know. I'm not one of those people who's like, well, I learned traditional poly modeling for animation, so that has to be my workflow forever. I'm like, if this cuts down 2/3 of my time, you better believe I'm gonna do that, because that is better for everybody. Like, you get your stuff faster, I get to take on more jobs, get more weird portfolio pieces, get more experience. I've always kind of been a person where it's like, I don't necessarily shoot for perfection the first time I do things, I shoot for speed, because that allows me to iterate much faster. So it might, I can do 50 iterations of something and get progressively better and learn from my mistakes, keep refining my technique, whereas if you spend, 50 hours doing one project, if it's like fundamentally flawed at the beginning, you've just spent a bunch of time sort of, not wasted per se, but like you've just spent a lot of time going back and sort of tweaking that and refining something which is fundamentally flawed to begin with. Just different ways of working. It confuses the crap out of a lot of people, but that's usually what I do. And that's not to say, for the record, that I was like, had no idea what I was doing this whole project. It's just, I've just sort of been experimenting a lot recently with like different workflows, and I think this one actually worked pretty well for me, so I might sort of build on that for the future. Where again, I focused a lot less on the base model, and I was like really just sort of went in with the sculpting. And there was actually, so I kind of like finished this, and then it was decided that there should be some major sort of structural tweaks to this. So like basically the face should end up being narrower, and the little bones on the side should end up being straighter. So I went through, there's a brush in ZBrush called the Move tool, which I knew about but like never really played with, which actually made that way easier than I expected, which was great, because I was like, oh god, normally that would take me like hours, and trying to do it with like soft select and Maya, which wouldn't even work for this. I mean, like it would, but it would be awful and look terrible and just be gross. ZBrush is crazy powerful. If you ever do stuff like this, it's like $700 on sale, but like if you're, doing commissions, and like it's so efficient and so powerful that like for me, I feel like I've paid that off already, just by the amount of efficiency and extra functionality that I'm able to get with the program. That being said, I realize it's not within everyone's financial budget to be able to do that, but anywho. But yeah, so I'm just kind of going through. A lot of times if I'm doing bones, you can see here I'm sort of adding like a base texture to the whole thing, just because I think it helps sort of sell that like gross worn look a little bit. And this is like more or less where it was sort of finished until extra changes I think had to be made to the shape of the face. I am going in and actually adding a few more cracks in along the whole thing, but basically what ended up happening is I designed it to fit around a human face comfortably, and there was, I guess, a little bit of miscommunication. It happens, no big deal. But there's a bit of miscommunication where I was like, this should fit on a human face. But it turns out the priority was actually having it like match as closely as humanly possible to that reference, which basically means shave a crap ton of space out of the cheek. So at this point, to fit it on a human face, it might actually need to be scaled up a little bit. If anybody buys this file from Nico, it's available on his shop. I don't know what files he's chosen to list, but I gave him like 5 versions of the helmet, like one that is kind of like this version, which will fit a face, and then the other one that's like upcoming, which will have thinned versions of, the cheekbones and all of that good stuff in it. So like I said, no idea what he's choosing to list, but he does have those files. Theoretically, you could request them if you wanted them. But anywho, I enjoy doing cracks. The dram tool is really, really fun. And then I was like, what if I just sort of carve out some little areas, like little pieces of bone of like actually chipped off instead of just cracked. Alright, and apparently I didn't actually go through and record any of me modifying the helmet with the move tool. But basically it is just one brush in ZBrush. So here's a rotated version, or rotatey version of the final model. I literally just use one brush pretty much for the entire thing. And again, that's the move tool. So this is the file. Hooray!